So everybody, I'm Toddi Steelman. I am the Vice President and Vice Provost for Climate and Sustainability here at Duke, and ostensibly the person who is in charge for something called the Duke Climate Commitment. And as part of that effort, I just want to sort of give you a little bit of background. So the Climate Commitment is a widespread invitation for absolutely everybody in our community to become involved in the climate work that we have going on throughout the university. And back in 2022, President Price basically said that we were going, as a university, to force through the prism our entire Duke mission, force it through the prism of climate change. And so that means our education mission, our research mission, our operations mission, our community partnerships, our external engagement. Basically since then, that is what we have been doing in a whole variety of ways. And oceans are a really important part of that work. Oceans is one of the 3 areas that we have designated as a research priority because we have such strengths in oceans across the institution, including our incredible Marine Lab down in Beaufort, North Carolina. Who has spent time down at the Marine Lab? Yes, a big round of applause for the Marine Lab. And if you have not had the opportunity to go down to the Marine Lab, I strongly encourage you to find your way down there in some form or fashion, whether it's through a summer program or a semester program. There are lots of opportunities to take advantage of and get yourself down there. So with that little bit of framing in mind, I was invited to host this particular panel of alumni that we have that have gone on to have really, really incredible careers related to the oceans. And so for the next hour, or a little under an hour, it is my privilege to actually be in conversation with these 4 incredible people. And so to get us started, I'm going to have each of you do a self-introduction just to get us underway. And so with that, we're just going to go straight down the line, do a short introduction, and tell us about your connection to the ocean. We can start with you. Very good. I think they're all live.
Testing. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Brownstein. I work at Whole Foods Market, and I have been working on seafood sustainability for 24 years. I was in the MEM class of 2000, working with Andy Reid. And, sometimes I wish that I had a job description that was one word, that was easy for people to understand, like, I'm an architect, a librarian, a welder, whatever, that people could understand in one word. But I don't, right? I develop sustainability standards for seafood. I work on fisheries and aquaculture, and my job is really varied. So essentially, the standards that I work to develop are based on conservation elements. So the abundance of a fish population, bycatch, the effectiveness of management. And I also work on the aquaculture side. I also work on traceability and human rights in supply chains. So it's quite varied.
A marvelously complex description. Very good.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sara McDonald, double Dookie. So from undergrad, my zoology major doesn't even exist anymore back then. And then got my PhD also under Andy Reid and Deb Gallagher, who is retired now, but she was environmental policy. So I did a hybrid degree of science and policy. I think I've had 5 or 6 careers in my career. I started off as a manatee biologist many, many years ago. Got into marine mammal bycatch and marine mammal bycatch policy. Also worked on sustainable seafood and human rights in sustainable seafood, which was a real left turn from manatee biology. Carrie and I have a lot in common. We found out we grew up near each other too. So, and now I am the Director of Conservation for the South Carolina Aquarium. So when I was working in sustainable seafood, I was working at the international scale, a lot on international tuna fisheries, as well as the human rights issue. And I wanted to kind of get back to grassroots and working with communities and feeling like I was making a difference. And so we do community-based conservation. We work in 3 different buckets. So reducing plastic pollution, improving community resilience to climate-driven sea level rise, and coastal flooding, and sustainable seafood. So I still work in seafood a little bit, but we promote, we encourage folks to increase demand for seafood harvested between North Carolina and Florida, because it hits those the three legs of sustainability: the environmental, the economic, and the social.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Sam Kelly. I was a Duke engineer. I graduated in 2018, and I actually think it's worth me just giving the backstory of my time at Duke as a part of my intro. I founded a group here at Duke called Duke Conservation Tech, and we were, I guess, engineers at the time trying to get involved with these thorny issues within conservation and help out labs. And part of that, one of the projects I got introduced to was with a PhD student at the Duke Marine Lab who was interested in trying to develop a heart rate monitor or a tag for whales. And so I did that work as an undergrad, and Dave finished his PhD and founded a company called FaunaLabs, and continued that work, and actually was working on this part-time up until very recently, before coming back full-time with them, with FaunaLabs recently. We were trying to develop and finish up that tag alongside a number of other applications in the terrestrial space. I think it's also worth mentioning I was previously at Conservation X Labs, which is a nonprofit based out of DC that develops technologies for wildlife conservation. I was involved in 2 projects there, a handheld genetic diagnostic tool, which actually one of the applications was designed to initially be around seafood traceability, and then started a project there called Sentinel, which was essentially smart cameras and smart monitoring using AI and satellite connectivity to allow real-time monitoring of remote places. But moved back to Durham recently to focus on FaunaLabs full-time, and it's been an exciting journey recently.
Fantastic. And Anna Marie?
Great, thanks. I'm Anna Marie Laura. I'm currently the Senior Director of Climate Policy at Ocean Conservancy. I'm very excited to be working on climate change because I think it's maybe the biggest threat facing the ocean. And so if you're wanting to work in ocean health and protection, then addressing climate change feels very important. My portfolio is really about ocean climate solutions. So this is offshore wind, renewable energy being done in a responsible way, also decarbonizing the shipping industry, because transportation and energy, these are still the largest drivers of greenhouse gas emissions. So while we know that the ocean is a victim of climate change, it's also really important to remember it can be a solution. And so it's fun to be working on the solution space and being for something. Of course, we're also against offshore oil and gas and sort of the continuation of fossil fuels, but it's nice to be able to talk about the solutions. And before Ocean Conservancy, I was with an organization called RARE, doing international conservation and development, and their shtick is like behavior change, so community-led conservation by using behavior change methods to really understand the problem and then develop a solution. Sometimes that solution has nothing to do with conservation. It's usually sort of a development, food security, financial security issue in a local community, so that was different and interesting. And before that, I was on Capitol Hill. I had a great advisor also, Dr. Andy Reid, who suggested this fellowship called the Knauss Fellowship. So I started as a Knauss Fellow in Senator Whitehouse's office and then ended up working for him for 5 years.
Fantastic. So what you're getting a picture of up here is that we've got graduates who are out doing multiple dimensions, but all working in the oceans field in some way. They may be doing policy, they may be doing conservation, they may be doing engineering or tech, fisheries science, right? And they're pulling it all together in very different ways. And so I think that's really illustrative, especially when those of you out in the audience are contemplating perhaps careers in oceans. What can that look like? How did they get to where they are? So let's turn to this next question, which is, tell us each, and Anne-Marie, I'm going to start with you, and we're going to go in reverse order this time. Tell us a little bit about your career journey, the trajectory that you've been on. Was it a straight path? Was it circuitous? How did you get where you are today?
Okay, I'll try and do it fast. But I think probably like most people in the room, I was first interested in science and animals, and I wanted to understand them. And then I don't think you can start learning about the natural world these days without understanding that what people are doing is affecting them. So that happened sort of end of high school, in college, and switched quickly to be like, well, we need rules. that takes you to policy. It's all about managing people, as Dr. Orbach used to tell us. So I got interested in policy. I was lucky to be introduced to people who told me about interdisciplinary programs like the MEM program. And so, the people that were my intern advisors were, folks knew the people, the relationships were really important. I didn't know about the MEM program until someone told me about it. And telling people that I was working with in undergrad what I wanted to do, they helped me find things, like Andy recommending the Canals Fellowship. So it took some people, but I ended up doing my gap in between first and second year of MEM was at League of Conservation Voters. So I was like, well, if you want to work in policy, the politics are very important, and that League of Conservation Voters holds politicians accountable, and it was really cool to learn and go to meetings where they were holding these policymakers accountable for their votes, and trying to convince them to vote a different way. So it led me to the Canals Fellowship, and then Senator Whitehouse's office. I mean, being on the Hill felt like I was getting a PhD, and I don't even know what you call working on the Hill, to be honest. It's such an intense but great experience. And all of the nonprofits come in and talk to you, and all of the federal agencies come and talk to you, and you just get this really rich overview. You're not able to go too deep on anything, but amazing overview. And when I was ready to leave the Hill, one day when Ted Cruz was like reading a bedtime story to his children from the floor of the Senate because he'd shut down the government, I was like, well, let me do something totally different. I didn't want to just go lobby Congress. I've just been doing that. I had learned how to do, the work to some extent. So Rare was working on international policy. That was an opportunity for me to go do not domestic, but international. And their program was focused on small scale fisheries. Amazing to sort of understand the development side of conservation and just that connection to development professionals. And then Ocean Conservancy, I get to do both. We're working on domestic policy and we're doing global. And so I like working on climate change, even though it's a wicked problem. And I really like to found an organization that I can still keep an eye on Congress and try and, convince them to do the right thing, but then globally also try to build a bigger movement for the ocean and the solutions that we need.
Fantastic. Sam, let's go to you next.
Yeah, I think I guess I came into Duke as a stock standard. I don't know if that's a bad way to say it, but like a stock standard mechanical engineer. I really loved the tinkering piece, and it was actually a lecture that Dave Johnston gave at the environmental school in 2015 that really turned me onto the idea of how I could use those engineering skills from those classes in the context of marine science initially. So Dave Johnson, for those that don't know, runs the drone lab at the Duke Marine Lab, and so I spent a summer down there, and then one thing led to another. I started working with Doug Nowacek and met Dave. So I think that was really a great kind of way that I managed to figure out I wanted to do quote unquote conservation technology, and was able to kind of get a job in that space with Conservation X Labs. As far as the technical piece, I do think although my career has been somewhat linear or in just staying in the conservation technology space, the skill sets that I use day to day have changed dramatically, which has been really interesting. So, like I said, when I was at Duke, we did a lot of small projects. A lot of it was mechanical engineering, CAD, that kind of stuff. And what's been really interesting over the last few years, how much of that stuff has changed to software and AI. I still do obviously a lot of electrical work with the whale tag, but it's been really interesting to see how that skill set of mine what the jobs have demanded has changed over the years.
Excellent. Very good.
All right, so I'm old, which means my career path has been a little bit longer, but I will try and keep it brief. I did mention a little bit. So when I was an undergrad, I spent a summer at the Duke Marine Lab, and I was studying bottlenose dolphin behavior, and I thought I was going to be a marine mammal biologist, and that was going to be my career. And I became a manatee biologist and studied manatees for my master's thesis and worked for the Marine Mammal Straining Network, and I was a field biologist. And I realized I needed to learn more about the policies in government that protect these animals. So I got a job with National Marine Fisheries Service in their Office of Protected Resources in DC in a cubicle, and hated it. But I learned so much about how government functions. It was that I mean, it didn't even last 2 years, but it was like the PhD of how government works, how to write regulations, all of those things. And I went back to become a manatee biologist again. But at that time, I sat on the Florida Manatee Recovery Team, which is a team, it's a multi-stakeholder team that helps create the recovery plan for endangered species. And that's when I got interested in multi-stakeholder input into marine conservation. And so after I left, I got a job at the Duke Marine Lab, and I was managing a global project on marine mammal, sea turtle, and seabird bycatch. And then I had a conversation with Andy about this whole stakeholder process, because there's a slightly different one just for marine mammals that is more of a bottom-up versus a top-down process. So that's how I ended up doing my PhD. And I learned a lot about fisheries during this whole time, and a lot about people, and increasingly became much more interested in sort of how humans, we are a part of the ecosystem, and how and that interaction and interplay, and got a job with the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch program, which assesses the environmental sustainability of seafood. And they work closely with Whole Foods, and but at the time, my boss said, there was a huge, a bunch of articles that came out about forced labor and human trafficking in the Thai fishing industry. And they said, we're going to start working on this issue. Who's interested? And I just said yes, because I thought this is something I know nothing about, and started working on it, and helped create a tool to assess the risk of forced labor, human trafficking, and hazardous child labor in seafood products, which I never thought I would do. I worked with a woman who had spent her career working for the International Labor Organization. I taught her about fisheries. She taught me about human rights. It was fascinating. But as I mentioned before, I thought, I don't know if I'm really making a difference on this global stage. And I really wanted to feel like I was affecting change. And my current job came open, and we do community-based conservation. The main tool that we use is citizen science. So we empower people to collect data, and to have solutions-based conversations about what's happening in their communities. They already know what's happening, but they may not necessarily have the data to help have conversations with decision makers. So that's what I do now.
That's awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Carrie, let's go to you next.
Sure. So my first job after Duke was working as an assistant to a law professor at the University of Maine, who is writing a book on how science gets used in marine policy decision making. But actually, it was during my summer between my first and second year at Duke that led to my first job. I had 2 internships. One was working with NOAA, doing a research project on the crab fishery, looking at whether dolphins were getting trapped in crab pots. And then I had a second internship. So that was to get field research experience. The second internship was with an organization in Charleston, South Carolina, where they were working on the impacts of coastal development on the South Carolina coast, right? How development was affecting the coast. And I had to go interview a manager of an Audubon swamp forest. And he asked, and I was asking him about coastal development, how it was affecting the swamp forest. And he said, how did you get interested in swamp forests? And I decided to be honest. And I said, well, it is fascinating, but actually what I'm really interested in is fisheries and interactions between fisheries and protected species. And he said, well, you have to meet my favorite colleague who happens to be in town. And that led me to a job with an NGO that was working on a seafood consumer program. And I developed a methodology for assessing fisheries and aquaculture. And I worked there for about 5 years until I outgrew that job and started consulting. And I actually loved consulting. I loved working with a network of NGOs mostly on different projects. And I wasn't looking for a job. But then several colleagues sent me the announcement for my current job at Whole Foods, and I read it, and I said, wow, I really think this was written just for me. Travel around the world, learn everything there is to learn about aquaculture and fisheries, and develop policies that can change the seafood industry toward greater sustainability. Great, sign me up. I'll do it. So I had no idea how to do that, but I figured it out, and it's been an amazing It's been an amazing journey, but mostly because of the amazing people that we work with. It's a lot of fun.
That is really great. So, when I hear the four of you talk about your respective paths, it is interesting because I feel like networking was really important for each of you. So I think that's a really good take home. The second thing that I hear is that you tried something, you liked it for a while, then you figured out what you wanted to do next. Sometimes to have impact, sometimes to feel like I need to flesh out this part of what I want to be. And I think that's really interesting because you're always sort of building the path and moving to that next step. Like, what do I need next to try to do the thing? And I think that's telling because it's really hard to figure out what you want from the get-go, right? It's a process of figuring out what you like, then figuring out what the next thing is, and then not being afraid to take that next step also when it presents to you. So I think that's really, all that is very interesting. So I've got some individual questions for you, and Sara, I'm going to go to you first, all right? So Sara, you work for an aquarium. Can you tell us what comparative advantage aquaria have for working in the conservation world? And what is the superpower that you see in your current job for what you do?
Okay, so the first, what's really cool, people study aquariums. So a lot of social scientists will study the impacts. In fact, the company's name is called Impacts, so they're super creative with that name. And one of the things that they do is they survey people about trust in information, and aquariums are more trusted sources of information than the federal government, than newspapers and magazines. Pretty much, they rank the highest as far as being trusted sources of information. So people trust us that we're going to be telling them the truth and that we're going to be sticking to the science, and that's what we do. So the South Carolina Aquarium teaches to the South Carolina state curriculum. We have a huge K through 12 education program. We're expanding it. So currently we reach about 7,000 students a year. We're going to be expanding that to 14,000. I can't take credit for any of that, and I don't work in the K through 12. Our kids, I work in the adult education or the community education because we do work with kids too. So I think our superpower, in addition to being trusted sources of information, for my current job, I think it's the community empowerment. And and the relationship building that we do. So I have a very small team, and we work statewide, and so we have to work with everybody. And we call ourselves the big tent people, but relationships really move at the speed of trust, and so it takes a lot of patience and listening and trust building. We work with a lot of underserved and marginalized communities. And I think, just trying to empower people and create a sense of community. Just one cool story. We do community litter sweeps with data collection. So we always, if you clean up a beach and you don't collect data, that litter's coming back. You're just going to keep cleaning it. But if you can collect data on that litter, you can then help inform litter policy. You can help inform, where do you have signage or where do you have trash cans and things. And the other cool thing, though, that we do is when we have these community litter sweeps, we'll pair people up, strangers, because you have to work in pairs or in teams of 3. And by the end of the litter sweep, which is maybe an hour and a half, they've created a friendship. They're going to lunch together. So the other cool thing, especially since the pandemic, is that we're helping to create a sense of community sometimes where none exists. And that's a superpower, I think.
That's really fantastic. Sam, I'm going to go to you next, all right? So your work currently focuses on emerging technologies, and you're developing this tag, which I think is really cool. Tell us about some other technologies out there that you get excited about. Like, what are some other things out there that you have your eye on that you think are interesting in the ocean sphere?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, and they may not be like in products, but I think as an engineer developing products, there's really interesting emerging technologies, at least to enable products to be better. The first one, and I'll kind of glaze over it because I think everyone hears enough about it, but I do think like a lot of the applications with AI are pretty exciting. My previous job, we were doing a lot of computer vision work to automate camera monitoring tools, and that saves a lot of time. And I think that piece there, any technology that prevents or reduces the amount of time that people have to do manual work or repetitive tasks, that's really exciting. The second piece I'll call out, and this is maybe a little biased because of the types of technology I do develop. I do think the communications piece is really interesting right now. I think you'll start to see a lot more emerging satellite. It's called direct-to-cell satellites. So basically, your phone or any standard cellular device can now talk to satellites, which is really interesting as far as animal tracking technology and other things in that space. As a very brief example, I did some work in the Galapagos last year, and on Floriana, which previously had no internet connectivity, and then in the space of 12 months they could completely transform what that whole community project looked like, because they could analyze that data, pass it off to collaborators off the island and things like that. So I think it's a non-obvious technology, but I do think that from what I've seen, that has really changed at least how fieldwork can be done.
That's great. Carrie, I'm coming to you next. So can you explain to us why it's important for us to consider where our fish comes from that we consume, and what are some things that we can all do to make smarter, more sustainable decisions when it comes to seafood consumption?
Sure. The hard thing about this is now I have so many follow-up questions that I want to ask him. I want to know if that, satellite to cellular connection can be used on vessel tracking and Wi-Fi on board vessels and all these things. But I won't ask those right now. Okay, so why is it important? So with over 3 billion people in the world relying on seafood as a significant source of their protein, seafood and increasing the sustainability of how seafood is produced is a matter of food security. So, that is really important to keep in mind, right? It's not just that we like to eat salmon for dinner. This is how a lot of people around the world are getting their protein. There's a big range, I should say, in how seafood is produced, right? And just like there are good farms on land that are producing produce in excellent ways, there are ways of farming that are hugely problematic, right? Depending on the kind of inputs that are used. Same in aquaculture, right? There's a big range. And in fisheries, there's a big range too. So the way that fish are caught, the way that fish is farmed, and I'm just using fish as a catch-all, right, is really important. Even just within the realm of bycatch, the way that fish is caught makes a really big difference if you're catching tuna one by one, say with pole and line or troll methods, compared to, say, a purse seine or a long line fishery. And the implications in the seafood industry, they're huge, right? Because you've got IUU, illegal, unreported, unregulated fisheries, operating. You've got fraud. There's human rights issues. But the good news, right, is that when I first started working on this stuff, it was about trying to get the industry to even think about this stuff and pay attention to it. At the initial meetings that I used to go to, where it was mostly NGOs, there'd be one industry representative at the table and maybe 20 people total at the table. Now, that has really changed. And what's great is that the tools and the information are available for any company that wants to source in a way that supports conservation. We have the tools. Most people, when they are looking for seafood, are just trying to get dinner, right? They just go and they want to buy something and they want dinner. They're not looking to do a huge amount of research to do that. And so, just by knowing where you can get seafood, like what market, what retailer, what restaurant has strong policies for how they source, you can make a big difference.
Excellent. All right. Anna Marie, we're coming to you next. All right. So you're doing a lot of really interesting work in conservation policy. How does your job use science? I think we would all like to believe that science informs policy. So can you speak to that and tell us how science, or does it actually inform policy?
Okay. I mean, definitely science informs policy. I would say it's just almost never the only thing. And so it's important to remember It's important to remember for your policy, like your general public is never your target audience, almost never your target audience to pass a policy. There's going to be people who are with you and you kind of don't need to worry about them. And there's people who are definitely against you and you don't need to worry about them. It's like the people in the middle. And then you figure out who are they listening to, and maybe it's scientists. And then you find, like Sara said, the ones that they trust. It usually is someone local. Like if you're doing this in Congress, you want to get the University of Nebraska to come and talk to the senators, not someone from College of Charleston. So, who the scientist is, and if they have a connection to the people that you're targeting is really important. And also, if the science doesn't, I think for a lot of problems you're trying to solve in conservation, sometimes the science doesn't exist yet, or it hasn't come from that credible place, and so you have to find a way to get it done. I think that's where, academics and universities are amazing. But the other thing I'd say is just any kind of policy also can really support science. And there's so much policy that can drive good science. You can set policy and regulations for how to, NEPA, for example, like our environmental impact statements, our environmental assessments. These are incentivizing or driving, mandating in the science that you need to make decisions. And so there's a ton of policies that actually can affect the science itself. If the federal government doesn't have money to do science to inform their decisions, so appropriations process, NSF gets money from Congress. How much are they getting? Is Congress telling them new programs or where it needs to go? And they do, absolutely, because scientists come and say, we'd really love to research this, but we don't have enough funding, or private industry isn't interested enough yet, but we know this is coming. And so we need oftentimes federal government, federal dollars are used to bridge that gap until the private industry is interested. And then again, you need regulations to make sure that private industry isn't funding just their own science and no one else is validating the decisions that they're making. So science is absolutely used, and it's not just informing the policy, but then policy also is helping get good science done.
I really appreciated all of your answers, and I just want to try to say there's some really hopeful messages coming from each of you, and I want to emphasize that a little bit. Carrie, what I heard from you is that we've really come a long way when we think about where we were maybe 20 years ago and we think about sustainable seafood. Just there's been a lot of progress that's been made today. There are more people in the room that really care about this as a value, and so you've seen a lot of progress just during the time you've been involved in this. Sara, you are a trusted, empowered, community-based organization fully embedded in the place where you live. And you do a lot of work basically to gain that trust. It's the citizen science by working on the ground that actually probably engenders a lot of that trust, which I think is really exciting. So we have models for how we create trust at a time when sometimes there's not a lot of trust in institutions, and I think that's really encouraging. So you've got a model for demonstrating how that actually happens. Sam, the technologies you're talking about, I just really like the riff that you had, Carrie. You want to talk to Sam about the satellite technology and how that can be used, right? Because there are new techniques emerging all the time that will allow us to take that next step. And you're working on the forefront of making that happen. So very exciting also. And just how we go about, Anna Marie, science is being used, but we have to be smarter about how we actually do it, because we have to identify our audiences and be really clear about how it's happening, and pull in the people who are most trusted also. And so I think some really good lessons come out of each of you in those responses. I'd like to now turn to what are some important skills that each of you rely on that you previously did not think were important. So where have you come to in your own careers in terms of skills, maybe when you started, that you were like, hey, I didn't think that was going to be a thing, but now this is a thing. So Sam, I want to go to you first on this question.
Yeah, sure. Like I said, I was a mechanical engineer during my time at Duke. I did not take any software classes while at Duke. And I guess the skill that I have learned to appreciate most, or have learned that I feel is the most important thing, is an ability to learn continuously. I think if you looked at the work I'm doing now is very different than what I did 6 months ago versus 12 months ago, and so on. And I think I felt initially when I first started my career that I kind of needed a qualification or a certification to do the role. I'm not a software engineer. but I do a lot of software now. And I think having the confidence to know that you can learn that stuff continuously has been kind of, I guess, something that I've really come to appreciate as a skill that at least I feel like I've learned to develop. It's really important to not stay in a stagnant mode, but continuously learning.
Anna Marie, we'll go to you next.
Sure. Well, I wish that I could say a second language because that really would have come in handy, but I can't. So if anyone's considering it, keep going. Because I work in international policy a lot of the time. So I think, one answer is the ability to, it's very similar to what Sam said. I didn't think that I'd be able, leaving Duke, to sit down with other government officials, high level government officials from other countries, and sort of make the case. It felt okay that I might be able to do that in the United States, but just I wasn't an international affairs major ever. It wasn't a background. But then you meet people, we had rare offices in other countries, so I had my colleagues who I could learn the culture, learn the practices. You can understand what the priorities of other countries are by going deep in the policy and reading policies and just getting that confidence to go and take those meetings and do those meetings and feel like just understanding the global development space a lot more is something I did not know that I'd be doing when I left Duke.
All right. Sara?
So I think a skill that I didn't think much about is just science communication. And now I know everybody's really interested in it, which makes me very happy. But talking to people, listening to people, it's really, it's so much of it is about human interaction and engaging with other people, even if you're really interested in how this one animal moves in space or but if you want to figure out ways to protect animals in the ocean, you really need to learn how to communicate and listen to other people.
Carrie?
Yeah, a few of the skills that are critical in the work that I'm doing are, I'd say number one is collaboration. Working collaboratively is a key to, I think, all the success that I've had in the projects that I've done. Without that, it would never work. Writing and the ability to really deeply listen and understand the perspective of others has been a huge part. I think the part that I didn't know I would rely on so much is the skill of being a science translator. So, I have to read the science or speak to scientists or, could be attending a conference, whatever the format is, right? But then I have to translate that into a format and into a discussion that people without this background will understand. And in order to set a policy that people will agree to. And I didn't realize how valuable that would be to be able to translate that science into that format that people will understand. And I don't think there's that many people like me in other companies that have the kind of background that I got at Duke. I've met a few in the UK and in Europe, a few. But given how many people will be in the room when I'm in a meeting on some particular topic, I just don't see that there's that many people that have the background. So I think that's the main one.
Very good. I'm going to transition from that question into the next question because you've just set it up so beautifully, Carrie, which is how, you said that that there were skills that you had. How did Duke prepare you or not prepare you for the skills that you needed? Like, what did you get out of being at Duke that was particularly helpful to you? Or conversely, like, what didn't you get that you wish you had? So I'm going to go right back to you again.
Okay. So I think that what Duke taught me, like, very explicitly was how to understand the science of fisheries and how to understand marine ecology and the various topics related to all that, so that I could then translate it for others and develop policy based in conservation. So that's the main thing. I would say that a Duke experience, and I'm not just saying that because you're in the room, Andy, okay? But when, I think it was in the marine mammal ecology class where we did a mock take reduction team. And our group was looking at, I believe it was take of harbor porpoises in a gillnet fishery, right? And I played the role of the fisherman, but then we had other people in the group playing the environmentalist, the fishery manager, there were a few other roles, but definitely the environmentalist, fishery manager, scientist, and fisherman, right? And I think that was tremendously valuable, right? To learn how to listen to other people who have different perspectives. I know I played up the fisherman role a lot. I had a lot of fun doing that. But we use a multi-stakeholder approach for developing standards at Whole Foods. And I've been in many, many forums since where there are those exact roles, right? And I feel like it really helped to understand how to listen to people.
That's great. Really great. Sarah, I'm just going to go right down the line this time. Yeah.
So yet another thing we have in common, I studied those take reduction teams for my dissertation. And so multi-stakeholder negotiation and bottom up, I had, and I'm not just saying this because Andy's in the room either, but I had the best committee. And they had not ever really worked together before. So I had Steve Rohde, who's at the law school and also teaches, and I was his TA for a few semesters. Randy Kramer, who is, he is an expert on survey methods, but also Duke Environmental Health. Deb Gallagher, Andy Reid, and then I had another marine ecologist in San Diego. And during my qualifying exams, I'm in the hall, I just finished my orals, 20 minutes. And I am nervous that I did not, oh my God, I'm gonna have to retake these orals. No, it turns out they were all just getting to know each other. So, but they were such an amazing, diverse group, and they had such great different perspectives. And I came in as a, marine biology master's, zoology bachelor's. I had to learn this whole policy. And so just being able to take classes at Sanford, taking classes at law school, taking Nicholas School classes, all of those multidisciplinary classes really set me up, not just my dissertation for success, but my future career. So I think the multidisciplinarity that Duke embraces, I think, is really, really important, and it was really helpful. But my committee was awesome, so I have to say that too.
Very good. Very good. Sam.
Yeah, I think in a similar vein, the multidisciplinary pieces at Duke are really amazing. I mean, so I had my core curriculum at Pratt, but I feel like seminal experiences I had at Duke were all outside of that core curriculum. I'll give a shout out to the Rachel Carson Scholars. I was part of the, inaugural class. And that was a great example of like I was an engineer. I wasn't doing a marine science research per se, but I was able to kind of enter these other spaces. I did some work actually with Steve Rohde as well in a class called Game of Drones. I think that was a great example. Actually, along those lines, like I said, I started a student group at Duke called Duke Conservation Tech, and we ran this conference annually called Blueprint. And actually was started in Penn Pavilion in 2015. And I got my first internship at that event. I met my eventual boss at that event. And I think that's the kind of thing that really changes the trajectory of someone's career. So I really do think it's those pieces, and I would encourage any undergrads or graduates to take advantage of those, because it really is an amazing opportunity that I think I probably didn't recognize at the time.
Awesome. Very, very good. So get out there. Do those co-curriculars for sure. Anna Marie?
Ditto. I took tons of classes in the law school, the Duke Environmental Law and Policy Clinic, climate change in the law. But what I learned while I was here on the collaboration piece, just to give it a spin, is like group work is the rest of your life. So every group project, just know your coworkers are coming for you, and it's a good experience that you're getting now. And also to think big. The papers, I mean, all of what felt like at the time small projects or things I was doing just for the class, like Steve Rohde had us do an exercise about coastal erosion and how to get people not to build there. And then later in Congress, we're working on the flood insurance program and how to get people not to build there using policy, or papers on the London Protocol. And now I'm working on marine carbon dioxide removal. And that's sort of one of the only policy tools we have for MCDR right now. So I think the projects that you have are opportunities to select projects, like pick things you're really interested in, because those become the foundation and base for knowledge that you definitely will use. I did not get a lot of project management experience, and I think that's like a really important piece. You're going to manage people, you're going to manage projects, and there is kind of the other side of being a manager or natural resource management. And so I think you look elsewhere for it, but it is something I have had to look elsewhere for.
Very good. Thank you for that. That's a great recommendation all the way around. So we've got a lot of students out here in the audience today. What advice, and I'll go to you, Anne-Marie, we're going to just come right back up the line again. What advice would you give to students and other young professionals who are really interested, passionate about protecting the oceans? Do you have particular recommendations for them as they think about launching into their own careers on this?
I will give one piece, which is from my experience as someone working in policy. Find a way to get engaged in politics and don't be afraid of it. Because I think in an academic setting, we still have this feeling like if I get involved with politics or I say what I think, I volunteer for a campaign, I can never work in government, or I can never, you can. Donate to the officials that you want, work for their campaigns, make a phone call, and get more formal than that if you want, because it's really helpful to understand most elected officials that you're trying to influence with policy are reporting to constituents. And so understanding how they get elected and how those campaigns are run, even if it's a small campaign, is great experience, and it helps you understand the decision maker themselves a little bit better.
Fantastic advice.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, absolutely. What advice would you give to students or young professionals as they get started?
Yeah, I think for me, my huge advantage was that I came at this space from a different perspective, and I would really encourage people to embrace that, whatever your interesting perspective is. Mine obviously was being an engineer, but I think there were other aspects of my life that were really important. And I'm from New Zealand. I always wanted to bring some of that technology piece back to New Zealand, and was able to do that last year. But it actually framed a lot of the decisions I made day to day within my professional career. So I just really encourage people to not just try to be like everyone else, but I really think that was a huge advantage for me, being able to be a little bit different.
Awesome. Sarah?
So I'm going to harken back to one of the things you summarized, which is don't be afraid to say yes. Say yes. If it's interesting to you, say yes. If you think you need to learn this, you may not like it, say yes. Because everything that I've done, even that job I hated so much, I learned so much from that, and that was really a springboard for a lot of other things. I use those skills. I still use those skills. So don't be afraid to say yes. And while you're at Duke, get to know your professors. That is my one regret as an undergrad that I didn't do, that I managed to do when I was a grad student. But know your professors. Get to know your TAs. They're actually pretty interesting too, believe it or not. And so get to know them while you're here. But then say yes I had no idea I was going to be doing human rights in seafood industry. That was never anything on my radar, and I found it to be one of the most rewarding projects I ever worked on. So say yes.
Carrie, what advice do you have for us?
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of talking to a number of Duke students, maybe because the field is such a niche that like they have funneled to me. But I'd say there's two things that I would recommend. So one is to think about what you really like doing on a daily basis, right? Like, do you really like doing field work? Do you really not like doing field work? Do you like writing, or do you actually hate it? Do you like working on global issues? Do you prefer to work on local issues? I think there's a lot of things that you have to try out to actually figure out if you like them or not. And so it's really good to try these things. And that's how I figured out what I liked doing and what I didn't like doing. But in reality, the thing you're doing in your job, you're going to end up doing a lot of hours during the day. So it should be something that you really like. And you should really think about what your talents are. Like, If you're really good at writing, and you're really interested in science journalism, that's one thing. But you have to like really think about it, because there's some things I think that are very sexy, right? And lots of students are interested in it. It seems like the cool thing to do. And then you try it out and you're like, wow, this is not me, right? So I think it's very important to think about what you like doing on a daily basis for a lot of hours each day. Another thing is to find a place to work that has a culture that fits you. I remember one particular job interview I took. It was a policy job, and it was at an organization where it was actually one of the first questions I asked. The person was showing me around. I said, so what's the culture like? Just, even in the office. And they said, well, I mean, it's pretty formal, heels and dresses every day. And I was like, wow, is it 1950? What's going on here? And I think it's very important, because it's important to work with good people. And I'd really recommend, even if somebody's very established or their work is interesting, don't work for awful people just because you think they do good work. It's not worth it. Find really good people that you think you'll connect with and love, because then you'll feel comfortable and you'll do your best work.
Life is too short to work for awful people. Okay, I like that. Yeah, Sam.
Can I say one thing? I just was thinking as you were speaking. I think looking back at undergrad, I was able to speak to people because people like to help undergrads. And I know this in my professional capacity as well, but I was speaking to people as an undergrad that retrospectively I would be nervous to speak to now. And I think that it is a really cool thing to take advantage of while you're a student. Reach out, even if, this person might be too important, particularly if they're an alumni, really interested in speaking to you. So I'd really encourage people to reach out. Don't be too scared to do that.
That is terrific, terrific advice. I say yes to students when I say no to everybody else. Because I'm always interested in helping students. So I think you have a superpower. As a student, you have a superpower to reach out. So use that superpower. We have one last question as we come to a close. And I just want to say thank you. You guys have been fantastic. I wish I could spend all afternoon with you and learn more from you. And I'm sure a lot of people in the audience feel the same way. Tell us about an accomplishment or an achievement that you're most proud of as you reflect on sort of where you are right now and in your efforts basically to protect the ocean. So Anna Marie, I'm going to start with you and we're going to come right down the line.
Okay. This is an easy one for me because it was a really unexpected win. When I was working for Senator Whitehouse, he had this crazy idea to start a Senate Oceans Caucus. There was already a House Oceans Caucus. He was not on the relevant committee. This was not a popular idea when he first had it, but he worked really hard, and I was working for him to do this, and he started a group of senators who had some shared priorities. We did have co-chairs that were the relevant committee, and there were 2 not from the committee and 2 that were, and the committee's the Commerce Committee. And so they picked their priorities. And they're still the priorities: IUU, marine debris, and then ocean observations, ocean tech. And so they worked on IUU, and the United States at the time had not ratified the Port State Measures Agreement. And so we worked, the staff, to get these folks to support ratifying the Port State Measures Agreement as the United States. And it was pretty cool, and it still feels like a success because IUU, as Sara and Carrie have mentioned, is still an incredibly important issue to address.
Sam?
I think if I was to speak to like a project that I was very proud to be involved with, and I can't give specifics about the location yet, but I spent so much time developing this technology that would basically allow you to be notified if a certain species was seen in an area, and there was it's the largest inhabited island ever attempted to be, where invasive species are attempting to be removed, it is in the final stages right now, and the technology that we developed is the technology that's helping basically finish up that project. And so we'll hear in the next 6 months whether that will be successful. But that's really exciting because you can point to specific species that are at risk of extinction: seabirds, giant tortoises. That without that kind of intervention would go extinct.
Great story. Sara?
I was just telling Andy this earlier. So just a year ago, almost a year ago, as part of our sustainable seafood program, we created something called the Seafood Connection. So we, the South Carolina Aquarium, we purchase swordfish and shrimp from a local fish house. They deliver the shrimp to a homeless shelter, and they prepare that in their community kitchen for about 200 to 250 meals. The swordfish goes to the Culinary Institute of Charleston. Those students learn how to break down the swordfish, fillet it, package it, and they deliver it to the Low Country Food Bank. They cook those into 300 meals for their Meals on Wheels. So each month, we're just piloting this, but we're feeding, roughly 500 to 550 food insecure neighbors, and we just expanded this program to the southern part of the state. So we're hoping to expand this statewide to connect our food insecure community with local sustainable seafood.
Awesome. Carrie.
Thanks. I think it's a source of pride that I've been able to develop a program within a large company. I mean, there's over 500 stores that can be a model for how an entire industry can operate. I mean, the commitment that I see within Whole Foods, not only to the seafood standards we develop, but also to organic farming, regenerative farming, and all the areas that Whole Foods has really pioneered for the past 30 years, it is a lot of fun and it's great. I think that it's great to see that a lot of other companies out there see Whole Foods seafood standards as the gold standard. So I'm proud of that. More specifically, I'm really proud of the canned tuna policy that we set, because it supports a lot of small scale fisheries and helps to eliminate bycatch. And there's a lot of turtles and a lot of sharks that are not getting caught in those fisheries. So to support the communities that are fishing that way is really great. So I'm happy about that.
Wonderful. Well, I think this is a really high note to end on. There's a lot of hope here in terms of how you can have a career that has impact and gives all of us a little bit of hope about how we deal with the complexities in our oceans. So will you all join me in thanking this amazing panel?